Okay, so we are talking about parenthood in children. So the first thing when looking at parenthood is factors that people consider when deciding whether or not they want to become parents. If they want to be parents, do they want to have their own children biologically? Do they want to adopt? Do they want to do in vitro reproductive technology? How many kids do they want to have if they do want to have kids? If they become pregnant, do they want to go through with that pregnancy, or do they want to have an abortion? And so there's all of these different factors that people consider in terms of parenthood. A quote from Lamana, Reedman, and Stewart says that decisions about parenthood are affected by people's economic circumstances, cultural beliefs, and societal norms. Decisions about parenting also proceed from individual needs, values, and attitudes. So when people consider things like adoption, there's questions within adoption that they have to ask themselves, such as, will we have an open adoption or a closed adoption? Will the birth parents being involved be an issue for us? Might they want to reclaim their rights to their child? If we adopt children, how will they adjust to our family? Will that be a challenge for us? If we adopt transracial children, how will that pan out? Will that be a healthy situation? Will that be more challenging? Will that result in more hardship for the children? What about adopting children with disabilities? Or international adoption, and that can be expensive. It can take a longer amount of time. Those children are coming from overseas. So there's a lot of questions that people ask themselves specifically with adoption itself. Then when you're talking about reproductive technology, so there's the ethical issue on the side of it. So you could there's several eggs that are taken out and frozen, but only one will get to be implanted and used and turn into a fetus. And so, is that ethical? It's an expensive treatment, so people of lower socioeconomic status tend not to go in that direction. As well as the treatment can be draining both physically and financially. And then it can be decisions of whether or not to do reproductive technology can be made and influenced by religious beliefs and cultural values, and this is all stated in Lamana, Reedman, and Stewart, page 190. And then things like the question of abortion. So some of the reasons that people will, decide to go this route is because pregnancy interferes with education, work, or ability to care for dependents. Sometimes they say it's not affordable, or they're not wishing to be a single parent, or they'll have relationship problems with their significant other, or the person or the couple as a whole have completed their childbearing and they no longer want any more kids. And so those are all things that people consider when looking at having children. So there's been several trends over the years, and one of those is the total fertility rate. It has dropped significantly in the last half century. In Lamana, Reedman, and Stewart, page 190, they state that the total fertility rate for the U.S. dropped from a high of 3.5 in the 1950s to the lowest ever recorded, 1.7 in 1976, a year marked by dramatically rising fuel and related costs that accompanied the energy crisis of the 1970s. And more recently, fertility has fluctuated around 2.0 because people put off having children in difficult and uncertain economic times. So, for example, in 2011, a result of the recession that began in 2007, the total fertility rate in the U.S. fell to 1.9. Now, another thing, another difference in trends is the change from a heterosexual married couple to now the open and acceptance of homosexual couples. And so there's also a quote from Lamana, Reedman, and Stewart in page 234 that says that the majority of research on the topic finds that children of lesbian and gay male parents are well adjusted with few, if any, noticeable differences from children of heterosexual parents in cognitive abilities, school performance, behavior, emotional development, gender identity, and as well as sexual orientation. And so it looks like it was something that was not accepted, and now it has become more accepted. Trends. So trends over the years in age. The age for birth is now increasing. So birth rates have dropped for teens and women in their 30s and later 20s, and they're increasing for women in their 40s. And some of the reasons for that could be that women are getting married later, they are completing their education and getting jobs, and they spend more time in the emerging adulthood stage, which means that they're still figuring out how to become independent adults, like they're college students who have moved back in with their parents after graduation. There's a wide availability of contraceptives, and so that makes it easier to have sex without getting pregnant. And then there's also reproduction technology. So when people are getting older, they're confident that there will be more options for them later on. Another trend is in child spacing. So there's just different ideas and new things that are being learned. And so one of the trends is that people are now spacing their children apart by 3 years and have found that that's a good amount of time to space them out for the sake of the physical and mental health of both mom and child. And also there is the question of whether or not the United States is pro-natalist or anti-natalist. Because the services being provided to families in terms of medicine, social services, education, and other financial aid are not great in the U.S. And so one could say that the U.S. is somewhat anti-natalist. As well as there's people who are just deciding to be child-free for things like education and having professional development, employment, and then they also will have higher incomes if they don't have children, because they'll be able to work more, spend less on kids, despite that the social norms are still encouraging people to have children. Advantages to parenting the 21st century. One of the advantages is that people are just generally more educated these days. So people have gone to college, but they also know more about child development and child raising. These are things that are taught in schools now, from middle school, high school, up until college. Also, children are not as exposed to violence, and there's more accessibility to the internet, and so people can go on with whatever questions they have, and they're bound to find an answer. And then there's also communication's easier. People can contact their children, they can connect and communicate with them. It's a lot easier. For example, I just interviewed my family for next week assignments, and one of the things they said is that when they were growing up, it was hard for the only way their parents would know that they got home safe for school was if they were both there at the same time. Whereas now parents can call their kids and make sure that they've made it home without physically being there. Another advantage to parenting in the 21st century is fathers are more emotionally involved. Done from a study by Dempsey and Hewitt, they said that while the full-time primary care, while having a primary caregiver of a father is still rare, research indicates that despite long work hours, fathers are taking on more responsibility for childcare than they used to, and they also remain more as helpers in comparison to mothers. They're just more emotionally and physically involved. Another study from Cabreras et al. Says that Um, Fathers in intact two-parent families formerly spent 30 to 45% as much time with their children and mothers. Now they spend 67% as much time as mothers on weekdays and 87% as much time on the weekends. So that's increased by over, 100%. It's doubled in half. And some of the reasons for this is because of increased rates of maternal employment. So moms are going back to work, so dads are able to work less and spend more time with the kids. There's been periods of economic decline. There's joint work schedules. Like I said, both parents are working. There's more flexible work hours in the 21st century. There can be part-time employment or job sharing, and then also people work from home. And so these all contribute to increases in paternal responsibility for childcare. In addition, we also have some disadvantages, or some challenges. So one of the challenges is the pluralistic society. So our society is very diverse, and with diversity comes conflict. That's just how it is. And so there's conflict in perspectives and in values. So in Cabrera et al., they did a study, and they talk about traditional conceptions of fatherhood from a specific cultural context might also be continuously changing because, for example, the Mexican-American family is characterized by an authoritarian male, and a dependent, submissive female has changed in the face of urbanization and acculturation within America. An emergent model describes the family as more egalitarian and fathers are more nurturant than expected. So roles of fathers and other men in children's lives will continue to evolve in the context of diverse cultural values and family ideologies. So that's just one thing that might be good, but also a challenge because people have different ideas. There's the sandwich generation. Parents are now taking care of their children as well as their parents, and so they're spread in two different directions, which can be challenging. Parents are working, so they are, have less time. They are worried about how they're parenting and how their parenting will impact their children both long-term and short-term. In 1960, according to Cabrera et al., 6% of families in the U.S. were headed by females, whereas 24% were characterized today. So that's a big thing. That comes from the U.S. Bureau of the Census in 1998. And so the challenge is that there's a lot of female head of households, and that's challenging for children growing up. And this is consistently associated with poor school achievement, diminished involvement in the labor force, early childbearing, and heightened levels of risk-taking behavior in children growing up with a single parent, or female parent head of households. And there's stigma against single mothers. According to Lamana, Reedman, and Stewart, the society strongly advocates a two-parent model, so single mothers report feeling stigmatized. Also, according to Lamana, Reedman, and Stewart, page 220, 218, there's a lot of tough questions asked these days, like, should I circumcise my child? Should my child sleep with me? Do I spank my kids? How much fast food is too much? Is my child being bullied, or are they bullying others? If my teacher of my child says they need medication, do I believe them? Things like puberty, or video games, or internet, or walking to school, texting and driving. What do I tell my child about terrorism? Or should I have a parenting app? And so there's a lot of things that adults and parents are more aware of these days in the 21st century that come as a challenge versus back when there was not as much access to internet and people worked more, and the mothers were home keeping a closer eye on the children. And so with technology there comes a lot of benefits, but also a lot of challenges. And so that will continue to evolve over the next several years and generations. And another question is same-sex parents. That's another thing that has evolved recently, is that same-sex families experience prejudice from people as well, and so that can be a challenge too. So those are that's my little spiel about parenthood, and my references are two articles and the textbook.